Welcome to another episode of Free Black America. I'm your host today. I go by the name Jay. Some people call me CJ, but today we're talking about a very important topic. It's not only important, it's personal for me because Children Protective Services, or whatever version it is in California, tried to destroy my family. So this is a personal sort of segment for me. And this video that is from the movie Malcolm X, Spike Lee's version of the movie, with Denzel Washington as the lead. This scene is showing what Child Protective Services does, where it's the vast majority of the cases reported, or I would say the majority, I'll take vast out, but the majority of cases reported are connected to or resembling neglect, what you and I would call poverty. So as in the scene displayed, it showed what I'm talking about. It showed this mom, Malcolm X's mom, Malcolm Little at the time, who is trying her best under the conditions of living through the era where the KKK was strong. And her husband was killed by the Klan. And she's raising these kids, doing the best that she can. And that was a social worker in that scene. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So in my personal story, I want to do a separate stream on this, but I'll give you a little bit of a tidbits in my interaction with Children Protective Services. Well, first off, before anything that happened to me, I thought Children Protective Services was a good thing. It was it was nothing I knew. I heard otherwise to think, and it's called Children Protective Services. I'm like, must be bad parents. And then when I got involved with Children Protective Services with my incident with my 16-year-old son, that's when I found out they weren't that agency that I thought they were. Because I was like, I was like, oh, this is nothing right here, because they're here to protect good parents, and this is great, so we're cool. That's not what happened. And when I figured it out, and I immediately figured it out, when I arrived at the first court case and I looked at the entire floor, it was only Black and brown people. And I said, what the fuck is this? That's when I knew this shit, something is about to go haywire, because I had no connection to social work, Children Protective Services being like, it doesn't under the state, just like the police state. And if the police state is here to protect by force, the Children Protective Services is here to do things by force, but it's a different kind of force. It's a traumatic force. The removing of your kids. I can't even think of another topic that will instantly get somebody enraged. And when they didn't like me, they didn't like me at all, because when you understand you're seeing oppression and the attempts of oppression and repression, your threats to me mean nothing. So I would show up to these meetings and I would talk, as I talk on this show, very bluntly and directly. Several instances where I would tell the social worker and whoever else we were meeting, I'm not afraid of you at all. I understand what this agency is doing. You're ripping Black and brown families apart. And I get what you're doing. And don't think I'm afraid. There's nothing you can threaten me by that's going to get me to bow down to you. And that's exactly what I said to them. And there was another incident where, and another thing, they make sort of these meetings that are optional. They make you feel like they're not optional. So just think about a parent who feels like, I just need to do these steps to get my kid back. And then they're telling you these things. So I show up to this thing. Oh, this is a parenting class. And we have so and so and so. And I said, parenting class? I said, and I asked the instructor, I said, is either one of your kids a straight A student? No. Has any one of your kids been accepted into the top 3 magnet programs in California? Nope. Is any of your kids a basketball prodigy? No. So I said, this is a quote, what the fuck are you going to teach me? And in preparing for this segment or this stream, I researched this shit, and it's so eye-opening to see. It's not eye-opening. It's so validating. All the thoughts that I believed about this agency. All the things I could see through the experience. To say, this is exactly the stuff that I was saying to them, and they all were acting like they never heard this shit before. I asked for an answer. Why is it only Black and brown people here? They're stumbling over their words. Well, I don't know. You can see with your own eyes. But I was given an attorney, my second attorney. He was a cool dude, this Filipino cat. I grew up around Filipinos, Blacks, Samoans. So felt real familiar with him. We got to talking. And he told me, he's like, people, they know about this. They know what's happening down here. They know. But no politician is willing to put their political capital on the line to say, hey, this Child Protective Services agency, they're not doing that. They're not protecting anyone. So they just let Black and brown families be ripped apart because no one is willing to stand up and say, this agency should be burned to the fucking ground. Because there's one thing about a police and a baton and a bullet ripping kids from you. And another thing that validates what I went through is that a lot of people in the abolitionist movement, the Abolish movement, are ex-employees of CPS. People who knew and finally had the guts to say, no more of this shit, and I'm fighting against this shit. I was assigned many different social workers because they didn't know what to do with me. They didn't know. There was nothing they could do to me. And what was unique about my case was that me and my wife weren't having a problem. And I guess that's more of a typical thing, that there's a situation or some sort of conflict with the two parents, and it wasn't with us. So they intentionally, one of the investigators showed up when they forced us to split households, showed up to her. You know, that investigator told her to not to be with me. And I'm like, this is an agency that's trying to help families? Disrespected my mom, talked to her all kinds of way because she grew up as a sharecropper and she don't know her indigenous roots because your fucking white supremacy ass lost it for all of us. We don't know that. So because she couldn't prove that, they was disrespecting her all types of ways and expected me to be civil with those motherfuckers. I would go to the fathers' meetings and to hear the stories that these fathers are going through. My situation was a cakewalk. So I have a wonderful guest today. You may know him on Twitter like I do, or you may have seen him on our latest summit, the Activist Summit. He was on that summit on I believe it was the 10 Demand Summit, the Abolitionist panel. So my guest is an abolitionist. He's the dean of social work over at the University of Houston. And he's part of what's known as the Up In movement, which is working to create a society in which the forcible separation of children and their families is no longer an acceptable intervention. So that's their mantra there. So I want to bring on my guest, and let's welcome him. Second time, I believe, on the RBN network. This is Alan DeLaF. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Alan, and I know you heard my story. I hope that did not shake you for this conversation, but there is still a lot of residual anger about that situation, because that actually is what propelled me into doing this work. It's this event, because I was completely in a different field of work, film production. And this event wake me up and said, there's more important work that needs to be done. So my first question for you is, can you just tell us who you are? I know I introduced you. I kind of, talked about some of the places, but Can you tell us who you are and what you do, what type of work you do, and what brought you to this type of work that you do?
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me. And as you said, I'm Dean of the Graduate College of Social Work at the University of Houston, and I'm a social worker. And I'm one of the people, like you mentioned, who started my career in the Child Protective Services system. I went into social work because I wanted to work for Child Protective Services because I thought I would be helping children and families. In the mid 90s, I was kind of an aimless junior college student. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to work with children and help families. And I saw a news story about a reporter that went on a ride along with a child protective services worker. And I was like, wow, that's how I could really help people, by helping kids who are abused and neglected. And I changed my major to social work. I went to work for that system. And then I did what the system calls investigations for about 6 years. I investigated physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect cases. So I was the person who was responsible for removing children from their families. And in the 6 years that I was there, I probably removed over 100 children, dozens of children from their families. It wasn't until I left the system and started to get involved in the state's work to address what the system calls racial disproportionality, which is what you talked about, the overrepresentation of mostly Black children in the system. And I realized that while I was in the system never talked about that. But I was able to look back and see my own complicity in the harm that was caused to families, my own biases that led to children being separated from their families, and realized that more needed to be done. Like a lot of people in this work, I spent many years as what you'd call a reformer, looking at ways to try to make the system better, to improve the system. And what I ultimately realized is that there is no improving of a system that's fundamentally built on racism and harm. This system, since its earliest origins in at least the modern system in the 1960s, was built for the purpose of maintaining the oppression of Black children and families. And if you think about it, family separations that the system does now started over 400 years ago in the United States with family separations that were done during the time of slavery. Those separations were done to maintain oppression of Black families, to maintain or to quell an uprising. That's the same reason family separations are done today. So what I do now with the Up In movement is try to educate, raise awareness, and ultimately, hopefully, political will about the harms that the system causes, the disproportionate harm the system causes to mostly poor and Black families, and to understand that no reform, similar to policing, no reform is ever going to change the system. You could make the system a little bit nicer, a little bit less racist, but at the end of the day, the system is built upon the idea of family destruction. And the only solution to that is abolition.
My apologies. What do you mean by that when you say, because of course there's no written history that somebody got in the room and said, hey, let's create this thing, we're going to rip away families. But so what do you mean when you say that was sort of the genesis or the beginning of the modern sort of CPS? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so if you look at the history of the system, the modern CPS system started to be developed in the 1960s. Prior to the current iteration of the system, the child welfare services were mostly about poverty relief. So in the early 1900s, 1930s, 1940s, child welfare services provided poverty relief services. They were called widows' pensions for mostly, if not exclusively, white women whose husbands had either died or been disabled. And those funds were provided to them so that they would not have to enter the workforce, so they could stay in their homes and take care of their children. Around the 1960s, during the time of the Civil Rights Act, that shifted. More and more people started to become aware of child abuse, which was previously not really talked about. So the issue of child abuse started to become known in the 1960s, and that led to a very rapid development of what's now called mandatory reporting laws. People knew at the time that mandatory reporting laws, if they were put into place, would disproportionately impact poor families and largely poor Black families because of the way that poverty was distributed during that time and still is today. And passed mandatory reporting laws knowing that Black children and families would be disproportionately impacted by passing those laws. So since the earliest days of the system, laws were developed with a white parenting standard in mind that created the ideas of what child abuse is, knowing it would disproportionately impact Black children and families, and then using this intervention of family separation.
That's a very good point, because that is actually the feeling that I had, and the feeling that I've talked to some other fathers. When you're in court, it's not, are you a good father? Is, are you meeting our white standards?
Exactly.
That's exactly how it felt to me. It wasn't, am I a good parent? It's, are you a good white parent? Are you, you know what I mean? Like, are you Cliff Huxtable? Or like, are, by this standard, because Cliff Huxtable is a Black parent, but he's modeled after the white, of a white, sort of a white father sort of parenting style. So I get that, but so it was created knowing that it would disproportionately affect Black and poor families. So this also is so many different layers of how capitalism is tied to holding Black people down, and it's this is the reason why Black wealth has to be targeted over and over by this country. Has been targeted at different points, you know, more aggressively than others. So it's keeping the Black community disabled as to do what? I'm curious to think what you believe, or what the movement believes that what that leads to, in other words.
The purpose is to maintain an exploitable working class that will always be available to benefit the white elites and their need for capitalist accumulation. So if you look at what the system does, you have this system now that vastly, when you said vast majority before, you are correct, vast majority.
Oh, I was trying to play it down because I didn't know the numbers specifically. So I was like, I don't want to overdo it, but okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Vast majority of children who are removed from their parents and put in foster care, up to 70%, are removed because of what the system calls neglect, which is largely related to poverty, if not exclusively related to poverty. And they do that disproportionately to Black children and families. 53% of Black children who are born in America will be investigated by Child Protective Services by the time they turn 18. More than 1 in 10 Black children in this country will be separated from their families. In California, where you are, 1 in 8 Black children born in the state of California will be separated from their families by the time they turn 18. That's how the system disproportionately impacts Black families. And the really important thing is, like you said, most people think this is children are removed because of severe abuse, severe harm. Only 17% of children in foster care are in foster care because of physical or sexual abuse. This is mostly a poverty problem.
I'm sorry. That is very eye-opening, because it's almost, the numbers are almost very similar from when we're talking about just violent crime. It's very similar. So it's like we have these institutions that aren't really here to protect us, because it's only 17% in this case, and then it's also a low number for violent crime. So there has to be something else involved. Is there any money motive down the line or involved in this Child Protective Services scheme? I call it a scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're coming up on the 25th anniversary tomorrow of the passage of the Adoption and Safe Families Act. What the Adoption and Safe Families Act does is, once children are forcibly separated from their parents, it makes it easier for the state to terminate parents' parental rights. So Black parents' parental rights are permanently terminated, severed, so that their children can become free from adoption at a rate almost double that of white parents. The incentive is states get money for every child that they put into an adoptive placement versus reunifying that child with their parents. states get up to $5,000 per child above the number that they adopted the prior year. So say in 2021, a state placed 1,000 children into adoptive placements versus reunifications with their parents. If they increase that to 1,500 in 2022, they get $5,000 per child that I put into an adoptive placement. And the money goes up if you're talking about children with special needs.
I mean, I know you probably see it. There's no way anybody can analyze this and not come back with the fact that this is slavery. Mm-hmm. This is part of slavery. Just like the prison industrial complex, just a continuation of slavery, because you know what else used to happen? You know what Black women were used for? To produce more slaves. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to have those children ripped apart because those children were worth more. You see the same thing that's happening. The children are worth money to the state.
Mm-hmm. And free labor. And that didn't stop after slavery. After slavery was abolished, then the Black codes that were passed in most Southern states allowed for the forced apprenticeships of Black children. So Black children were forced into what they called apprenticeships, but was essentially slavery, often in many states with their former enslavers. So even after slavery, Black children were still forcibly separated from their parents to replace the source of free labor that was lost during slavery. With Black adults, we saw rapid incarceration, and then through convict leasing programs, Black adults were forced into free labor. With children, it was these forced apprenticeships agreements.
So let's go back to 1864, mm-hmm. and let's think about the people during this time, the ones who are okay with slavery going on and they're making all this money. Do we really believe they said, oh, capitalists just said, we're going to give up this money. No more. So let's abolish slavery. Let them go back. There's no more. All they did was change the name and invent other institutions to do the same thing.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. A significant source of free labor was lost. And white people in 1864 did everything they could to replace that source of labor. With adults, it was incarceration. And, I'm sure most of you in your audience know this. Things that weren't formerly crimes became crimes for Black people. Homelessness became a crime if you were Black. Vagrancy became a crime if you were Black. And we saw rapid incarceration, and then all those adults leased out through these convict leasing programs, where the violence, the terror in convict leasing programs was even worse than it was during slavery, because they weren't owned by the enslaver. During slavery, there was some incentive to keep their slaves healthy because they owned them. In convict leasing situations, they didn't care if slaves died, they just got another one. And the same thing was happening with children. Children were put into these forced apprenticeship agreements to create free labor. That ultimately, then you get to the 1960s, it's not acceptable to do that anymore. And Black children started to be removed by Child Protective Services. And when you really think about the outcomes, what a lot of people don't realize, not just that children are removed from poverty, but people don't realize what happens to kids who are in foster care. Kids who are in foster care are more likely, when they get out of foster care, to be homeless, to be living in poverty, to not graduate high school, to be incarcerated, to have substance use problems, mental health problems. So what you see is a system that is causing all of the same conditions that keep Black Americans oppressed in the United States.
And we keep asking the question generation after generation, why come Black people can't get, why are you the only ones that can't, seem to get past this? Why can't you excel like everybody else?
Because the police and Child Protective Services are making sure of it.
You gotta give me a moment, because it's like a epiphany that I'm having here, that the systems, like, it's like when I think I knew all the layers of oppression, repression, and then you go, oh, Child Protective Services too. So there's literally not an entity in the United States that we can say this entity is here doing good. That's literally, I mean, if not Child Protective Services, I mean, what else? What can we depend on our government to do if we can't depend on them to run an agency that's supposed to protect kids?
Mm-hmm. And that's the real
literally
problem, the myth of benevolence, I call it, that this system has been incredibly successful in doing.
Yes.
You know, the reason that there is not the widespread calls for abolition of this system as there are with policing in prisons, although I don't know if that's, you call that widespread, because that still receives a lot of backlash. But you know, many people in recent years have come to understand how harmful and racist policing is. With Child Protective Services, most people think that this is a system responding to serious cases of abuse and neglect. And a lot of times that's perpetuated by the media. There are very rare instances of children who are severely harmed. That then makes the local news.
right.
Child Protective Services go out there and rescue those kids. And then people think that's what CPS is doing all the time. But they're not. Hundreds of thousands of kids are separated every day solely because of poverty. And then you see what we have here is you have a system that's taking children away because of poverty. You put those kids in a home with a stranger to take care of them. And then the system is giving those strangers that they call foster parents money to take care of those kids when all those children's parents need is money. Here in Texas, we give foster parents $900 a month to take care of someone else's children. What if we just gave that $900 a month to the mom who's struggling to meet her child's needs?
What do they say to that? Or has that been presented to them in a question form for an official answer? Or they like, what is the answer to that question?
This is where you see real like anti-blackness and classism come into play. When I say that in some other context, people say to me, if we give that money to the mom, how do we know she's not going to use it for drugs? Because that's what, since early days, people have been constructed to believe poor Black mothers do with money. My answer to that is, how do you know the foster parent's not going to use it for drugs? But that's not where people's minds go. People are okay, and that's the fundamental problem. People are okay with their tax dollars being used to pay a stranger to take care of someone else's child, but they're not okay giving that money directly to the family in need because it's a handout.
That's exactly going. That is a conditioning of the minds of American citizens by capitalists.
Absolutely.
To view capital or money in this way, like you're despicable if you need money and you can't afford it. It's absolutely that. What I want to do now is show you, and I'm sure you've heard of this case. This is where I think it was an American Idol. I'll let the story, but it's a Black couple who experienced being pulled over by the police along with Child Protective Services and having their kid taken away right there, and they streamed it all. Kind of went viral. I do want to play it to give context and then kind of talk about the situation.
Tonight, Florida's Child Protective Services is in the spotlight after American Idol finalist Aisha Mercado and her husband Tyron Demir came on the show last night and spoke about the removal of their two young children. Their first child was taken from them when they went to Johns Hopkins Hospital in February after he had trouble transitioning from breast milk to solids. A doctor called Child Protective Services claiming the baby was malnourished. Then just last week, their 10-day...
I'm going to stop there because it's frightening because that same situation happened to me and my youngest daughter, where my wife, who was unable to breastfeed our middle daughter and wanted to really bad breastfeed Kaylani, my youngest, and it wasn't coming out the way it should. So we was home, and me being the father, I'm like, I just, it's not coming out. We got to do something to feed her. Mm-hmm. So we end up taking her, and she was malnourished. Mm-hmm. But that was because the breast milk wasn't coming out good. Like, it wasn't anything that we did wrong. Mm-hmm. But if that doctor, I was gonna say police officer, it feels the same, almost like it's the same, but that doctor would have said, hey, this baby's malnutrition, we could have had CPS called on us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just for that. That's amazing.
Yeah. And there's tons of research that shows that those decisions by doctors are more likely to be made if the parents are Black. Doctors, and even not just malnutrition cases where like accidental injuries happen, child falls off a bike, something like that, they go to the hospital. If a parent is white, the doctors are more likely to believe the parent's story that it was an accident. If the parents are Black, they're more likely to call Child Protective Services and question whether they're being honest about it or not.
Like, people don't know, people really don't realize the indoctrination they have about the criminality of Black. They really don't understand, even you really can't even comprehend the layers that you think is your own decision making, and it's not. So let's finish the video, and then I'll ask you about this case here.
Old baby girl was taken from them when police surrounded their car, forcing them to stop and pull over, then give up their baby to caseworkers from CPS, claiming they weren't notified about the child's birth.
In the country right now, and having a situation where I'm not, if I tried in that moment to really protect my family, I would have ended up either incarcerated or lost my life. So just, it ain't easy watching that video to willingly have to give up 2 babies within a 6 months time frame, when our whole life is about family. So it's not just watching that, just,
that feeling has to be terrible, because I'm trying to overlay that feeling with the feeling that enslaved Africans had when they're kids. You have to give up, or you're carrying a child that you're not going to keep.
And in most cases, it was just the threat of separation that was used to keep enslaved people in line, to quell any kind of upraising. Because even if your children hadn't been separated during the time of slavery, everybody knew other children that had been taken away from their parents and sold to another, just simply sold away. So just the threat of that maintained compliance, oppression, and that's the same thing that's being done today within many mostly Black communities, some Indigenous communities, Latinx communities. Everyone knows someone who's had a child who's been taken away by Child Protective Services, and that serves as a form of fear to regulate behavior, to prevent that community from owning their power and trying to overtake CPS.
This is really insidious. Let's continue. It's heartbreaking.
It's something I wouldn't wish on nobody. Just being honest, to any father or especially any mother, because it's very important for any newborn to bond with their mother. Health is more than just what you consume through food, but also the nurturing. The bonding. Like, these are things that have been stripped away from my wife, that I have no words to comfort her through a time like this. So it's not easy watching that video.
Yeah, so I understand this, because it's the feeling of helplessness, because this happened to me. My wife called me crying and screaming because I was at work and CPS showed up to our house and told her, you got 24 hours to get out of here. Like, I don't understand. How do you think in this situation that we're watching on the video, that you're helping? This family's riding along. Have you heard of this case, by the way? Have you?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
This
absolutely.
family's riding along and just gets pulled over because they didn't report that they had a newborn.
Mm-hmm.
This is amazing. So, do you, if you know a little bit about this story or just the idea, it doesn't have to be specifically these people. What is, had you heard of something like this where if you have a newborn, you can have somebody call CPS on you? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, it happens all the time. In this case, what happened is this family had a prior investigation that was due to malnutrition. And I'm not sure what the outcome of that investigation was, but they had a prior record, and these of causing harm to their child. Those records stay in the system forever. So they're now labeled, marked in this system as an abusive parent. What happens is they have another child. They don't have a responsibility to report to anyone that they had another child, but the state agency somehow finds out they had another child and tracked them down and took that child away with no evidence of any harm being caused to that child, just solely based on what had happened 18 months ago with their prior child. That's, I mean, it's crazy to think about, but that's the kind of unchecked power that this system has. They use what the system calls risk. So the system would say they have evidence that this family either harmed a prior child or did something that caused harm to the child. So that's considered a risk factor when they have another child. And they had the power to go in there and take that child away from them.
I'm just feeling help like this. I don't know what to do here. Let me read. Let me play some more. This is just feeling. It feels helpless. It feels like this is egregious to me. This is like the trauma that is just laced throughout and how it affects so many people. An incident like this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just a wonder how Black people are able to keep this shit together with all the trauma. And I always say this with Dr. Or Professor Zonkas, that I feel like a lot of Black people have PTSD.
It absolutely is. And there's people that there's actually a syndrome, post-traumatic slave syndrome. That,
yes, I do know. Yes, go ahead.
But, I think it's so important to connect this trauma with the history of violence that happened with separations during slavery. I can tell you a quick story about this. It's the case that I think about most often of a child that I removed from their parents. This was a Black family in a poor neighborhood in Fort Worth, Texas. They had a about 8 to 9 year old boy that was engaging in some inappropriate sexual behaviors with other kids in the neighborhood. It was deemed by the agency to be more inappropriate than normal exploration during that time would allow for. And the agency decided they were going to remove that child. And this was my case. So we decided we're going to take the child away because there's the idea that something must be happening to this child to cause these inappropriate sexual behaviors. I went to the home to inform the mother and the grandmother that we were taking the child. And the grandmother yelled to the boy and said, "Run, Charles. The white people are coming and they're going to take you and they're going to sell you to the white people." And the little boy ran to his room and was like frantically packing a duffel bag, trying to escape out of the window in his room. But that's the kind of trauma that's there. Immediately seeing Child Protective Services and saying, "Run, they're going to sell you to the white people." I just think about that case every day, how it just shows the trauma that's been passed down over generations and centuries.
Yeah. So Is that one of the case that sticks with you the most, or is there another case that kind of sticks with you? Or is that one of the ones that to you that is the one that, because that actually was one of the questions I had. Like, is there something that were there cases that you experienced where you thought if it was your decision, it wouldn't go this way, that the agency is like, because I'm asking you this because when they assigned me a black social worker, that black social worker ended up recommending that all of this be dropped. Mm-hmm. And magically, that just disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
So I forget the question I was leading to. Yeah, I forget the question I was leading to. But when they did assign me to her, none of the social workers wanted to talk to me because I would talk politics.
Mm-hmm.
And this black social worker, when she rarely would want to call me, because I would talk to her and I would say, how does it feel to be a black person destroying black people's lives? Mm-hmm. How does that make you feel? How does it feel to be a tool of white supremacy? And it would make her very uncomfortable. And I think she left the job. Mm-hmm. She told me she was not going to be doing this work anymore. Yeah. So my question to you is, now I remember, were there cases where you just felt in your gut, this is not right, while you were working there? I mean, not after you left, but during the time, were there cases where you were like, this could have been different, or some, not just your cases, like any cases you heard or anything like that?
You know, that's what's really hard for me to think about talking about my time in the system, because it wasn't. You know, I could blame this on the fact that I was kind of a young 20-something with limited life experiences. What happens in the agency is you're caught up in what I think of as a culture of removal, where everyone who's in this system thinks that they're helping people, thinks that they're doing the right thing. And no one talks about the things that we're talking about now. No one talks about the harm of removal. No one talks about racism in the system. It goes completely, the racism that exists in the system goes completely unchecked. I can give you another example. There was this, so I was in a group of investigators. We would often investigate cases that were in this one agency on the kind of east side of Fort Worth, poor black neighborhood. We would get a lot of cases in that neighborhood. When we would get a call from that neighborhood, we would say to ourselves, we need to bring the car seat out on this one. What that means is, before we even went out and took a look at what was happening in these families, we were making a decision that we were going to be coming back with someone's baby. And so we need to bring a car seat with us. That's how people think of black families in this system. And, you know, the real problem is there's no supervisors, there's no one else in the agency who's checking those kind of biases. That kind of attitude toward parents is just rampant in the system. So it's, and the system is a racially diverse system. And that's everybody who thinks about black families in that system.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing for police. And why I tell when somebody says it was a black cop, that absolutely means nothing.
Means nothing.
Yeah, what is a like? And this is the analogy I like to use. If I'm a pig in a slaughterhouse, what does it matter if it's a black person that's slaughtering me or a white person that's slaughtering me? The job of being the person to slaughter pigs is the problem.
Right.
So so yeah,
the racism is built into the policies. I mean, there's individual decision making that's biased in the agency, but the racism is built into the policies because all the policies are based around this white parenting standard that all other families are judged against.
So then let's move into more of some of the solutions, some of the activism around this topic of child protective services. And when you were on the summit, this is the first time I heard this. I was like, what? It was like, yeah, we're having a guy on. Nick told me, we're having a guy on Abolish Child Protective Services. I was like, what? I was like, I have to watch this one. So yeah, so after that, I can't remember how many days I reached out. I was like, yeah, I gotta get you on the show. But what can you talk about the movement to sort of upend, I know, and no pun intended, but upend or abolish the Child Protective Services department? Or could you speak to that, like just the movement part and how long you've been involved in the movement? I'm curious to know how old maybe the movement is, and maybe talk about some of the people. I know Dorothy Roberts is a big figure because of the book that she recently wrote, and just some of her teachings in other books that she's written on the topic. So can you talk about all of that? I know I said a lot, but can you talk about all of that sort of solutions or things you're working on activism?
Yeah, so the Up-In movement started being formulated around 2019 with me and some other colleagues from the Center for the Study of Social Policy that had all worked in various capacities in the child welfare system, either on the social work side or on the legal end, lawyers who represented families, and all came to the place where we realized that the reforms that we had been involved in for decades just weren't working. And those reforms never work because they're all designed to make the system a little bit friendlier, a little bit less racist. Reforms are really a tool to trick the public and to trick legislators into thinking, oh, the agency knows it has a problem and they're doing something about it. The system knows those reforms are never going to work because the reforms never consider changing the foundational intervention of family separations. They're just trying to make family separations a little less racist and a little less
right. They just the appearance. They just kind of just want to make the appearance sort of different. I think let me see if we have a question for you. Somebody submitted a super chat. Let's see. CPS is used to remove Black children from their family because of poverty, and then they pay money to white families to take the kids. Plus, the courts might overturn ICWA soon. Colonialism alive and well. And when you say take Black kids and give them to white families, immediately Philip Drummond jumped into my head from Different Strokes. If you don't know Different Strokes, the first white savior on TV, go check out Different Strokes. It was a show I like, but let's read this one. If this is a question, people don't want to talk about the harm because they don't even want to talk about the adults who are still harmed by the system. A lot of my group home peers are harmed adults. And that's also something, a topic, some of these group homes, recovery homes that I've heard of. I'm not asking you to speak on it, but just speaking on the comment, that those are things that I have personally sort of heard. But did you want, I think you were going to say something about this first comment, or did you want to chime in on this comment? I'm going to read it again because what is the ICWA? Do you know what that is?
Yeah. ICWA, we call it. ICWA is the Indian Child Welfare Act, and that's currently being reviewed by the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court. They just heard oral arguments with that last week, and most people think that they're going to overturn the Indian Child Welfare Act. The Indian Child Welfare Act exists so that when children are separated from their parents and it's determined that they have an indigenous connection, that case is referred to the tribe that child is a part of, and then the tribe has the responsibility to determine what happens to that child. And it's related to the larger concept in the US of tribal sovereignty. That's under review now by the United States Supreme Court. And again, it goes back to, it's based on a case of a young baby, I think a 9-month-old baby who is indigenous, that was put into a foster home and I think eventually adopted by a white couple. And now the tribe is getting involved and saying that they want the child returned to the tribe because that's what ICWA is designed to allow. And the family is protesting that and suing because of that. And like I said, that not only gives the state more, if ICWA were to be overturned, that gives the state more power to separate children from their families, but it also would be a huge blow to the concept of tribal sovereignty, which goes well beyond the child welfare system. It's about tribes having sovereignty over their own people, their own lands.
And you say it's expected that it's going to be overturned. Is that with the feeling or the sentiment that you've heard? You said
it's the feeling based on the arguments that were heard, the makeup of the Supreme Court. Yeah.
What do you think we're living in right now with the Supreme Court? This is more of a broad question. It involves this, but because Child Protective Services is just sort of another sort of mass falling off of this capitalist system, and people are now saying, let's abolish it. So that's more of what I'm asking is like, there's a lot of stuff happening. Child Protective Services is part of it. What do you think is happening with people, like with this abolish movement, with people waking up to some of these unmaskings of these institutions?
Yeah, I think it's resulting in a lot of people, white people particularly, feeling threatened, feeling like the mechanisms that have been used for decades to keep Black and brown people down and to keep white people in power are being questioned. Their legitimacy is being questioned. And that is scary to white people who want to stay in charge. There's that aspect to it. There's also a large aspect of this particular issue that's related to the assault on reproductive justice that we've seen the Supreme Court be involved in. Reproductive justice says that people have the right to have children when they want to have children and to raise those children in the ways that they want to raise them. And that's very related to Child Protective Services and the power that the state has to intervene in people's decisions about parenting. So all of these issues and the assault to capitalism, they're all related in what's happening in the Supreme Court right now.
Yeah. So you see the same thing, because that was the point of where I was getting with the question. It's like they're all sort of connected somewhere, and Child Protective Services is one of them. Now, when people say, you hear this, defund the police, get some social workers out there. Now, me being through this experience, I always push back on that. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because now I understand that if a social worker is part of the state, there really is just a cop on the behind the desk. It's like they really have the power to sort of inflict pain on and rip apart lives. So could you speak to that point or to that part?
Yeah, that came up a lot in summer 2020, where people started to raise the idea of social workers being more involved with the police or taking more responsibility for certain cases that were being reported to the police, as if that would be a solution to anything. I, along with many other people, immediately said and wrote some pieces about this, that the idea that social workers being more involved with the police or taking over cases for the police is not going to do anything to eliminate racism, because it assumes that social workers don't have a huge problem with racism themselves. We see that in the amount of social workers involved in the child welfare system, but just in other systems. So one, it's not going to, social workers don't have guns, so that's good, but it doesn't mean that there won't continue to be racist outcomes in any case that social workers respond to. But two, It really goes to the fact of what I think is a critical place for social work to figure out what they truly value, and where social workers want to align themselves. Our code of ethics says that social workers must, and this is the only place in the code of ethics that uses the word must, social workers must take action against oppression, racism, discrimination, and inequities. If we really believe that, we shouldn't have anything to do with the police. Social workers can't be walking into communities hand in hand, arm in arm, with the very people who are responsible for murdering and terrorizing them.
Right.
If we really believe in our values, we will have nothing to do with policing. One of my goals through the Up In movement and many other social workers is to completely remove social workers from Child Protective Services. If we really believe that we should be taking action against racism and oppression, we should have nothing. We should completely disavow the system and have nothing to do with it.
Yeah, to me, I don't know why I assume this, but to me, it seems like Child Protective Services should understand what the police does, and they should have an adversarial relationship with the police. It almost feels like that, like if you feel like, oh, I'm a social worker and the police are coming in and doing, causing this trauma on this kid, so I'm here to say, that's what it feels like to me, not to be sort of embed with the Child Protective Services Agency. But one thing I did learn, the court system in California is a completely separate. So the children's court is completely separate from like any other court system in California. But this was fairly a new system. Fairly is what one of the lawyers were telling me, and I guess it is because you said it kind of developed out of the 60s. And then I do remember in the 80s, there were child abductions. I was young, but child abductions were very, at least in media, it was on the rise. And I remember this was born out of, or America's Most Wanted was born out of this era. So it was a lot of, that was what's in the news. So anyway, let's finish talking about the abolition part of this. So my next question is, how you sent me the I don't know if you call it webinar or the session you had with Dorothy Roberts. Great session. Can you talk about some of the work you've done with her? Because I think it's important for the audience to know some of her work, even though she's not the guest here. But I know some of the work because you recently did the webinar. Can you talk about the book she's written and just some of the work for those that may want to go and research more on this topic, and then we'll get in some of the work that you've done yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Dorothy Roberts is absolutely one of the people who has been leading this movement, I'd say, on the academic end of things. Dorothy is a legal scholar and actually wrote a book 20 years ago called Shattered Bonds that really drew attention to the problem of mostly Black children being caught up in the system, and wrote in Shattered Bonds exactly what you talked about before, that she was doing research on another book and was going into children's courts and was just astonished that every family, every child in that courthouse were Black, mostly Black children. And so that whole book talks about the fact that society allows whether knowingly or unknowingly, allows Child Protective Services to keep doing what it's doing because it's not doing it to all children. It's doing it to mostly Black children. So people just look the other way.
And it's like, and if you allow people, white America has to understand this. You can't just say, I'm not racist. If you allow racist institution to continue to inflict racism, you're part of the problem.
Exactly.
You see what I mean? You're allowing sort of the inflict. So like, for example, Joe Biden, 1994 crime bill did bad things. Why aren't they talking about fixing it?
Right, exactly.
Like, they're not talking about fixing it because they're fine with Black people going through this type of pain. But and another thing, Alan, another thing, think about how it reinforces the idea of racism without saying it.
Mhm.
Because it's like, well, black and brown kids are here, are the vast majority here. Well, why is that? Is it racism? No. Or is it simply because they are the ones who are doing the bad stuff? It's not our fault. This is how the agency, it's not our fault that it happens to be. You're saying then that Black and brown people and Black and brown parents are sort of leaning towards or have an affection for, or wants to be that way. It's like an innate thing for them, and without saying it. And can you speak to that, or if you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, and that's intentional. That's the thing I think is important. It creates the idea that Black families can't take care of their children without government assistance, without the government stepping in and helping them take care of their children. So it creates the idea that they're bad parents, that they don't care about their children. And again, I think it's just important to connect this back to slavery, because that was the narrative during slavery, that it wasn't a big deal to take children away from their parents because they didn't really care about them in the same way that white people care about their children. So, and I think that's persisted over time. People know that Black children are being disproportionately separated from their families, hundreds of thousands of them every year, but they're not understanding the pain, the harm, the terror that this is causing because it's happening to Black families. So yeah, it creates the idea that Black families can't take care of their children without the government help. It creates the idea that Black families are using drugs more than other families. The whole crack babies happened during the 90s. Babies that were born positive for crack cocaine were instantly removed from their parents. No assessment of the home environment, just instantly removed. So you have all these narratives over time. Welfare queens, crack babies, all lead to the way that the system treats Black parents now.
We really have to take a look at all of these systems of oppression and understand we were sold a lie. We were told the United States was done with slavery, and they're not. They just simply are not. They're simply are not. So Alan, can you speak to some of the work that where people can find your work, where if people want to get involved with this type of work or volunteer, here is one of the websites. This is the UpIn website. But yeah, could you like if somebody wants to get involved with doing finding out about this or trying to be part of this movement, how would you suggest that they get involved, whether they have kids or not? Like they just feel like this is just not right and they want to help in this movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Visit our website. It's upinmovement.org. We have a lot of resources there. We have, if you go to resources there, we have a couple policy documents that give our ideas about how this document right here, how we end up. That we kind of modeled off of like 8 to Abolition, 10 Demands. Those are our high-level ideas. We have 7 ideas about what we need to do to move towards abolishing the child welfare system, which we call the family policing system. So you can see those ideas there. Ending involuntary separations, reuniting children currently in care, ending surveillance. But also, as you know, and a lot of people watching probably know, abolition isn't just about tearing down the system. It's about building up things that we need so that we could literally get to the place where the child welfare system is obsolete. So we have here things like transforming societal conditions so families and communities can thrive, reimagining care, shifting power. This really is about taking the billions of dollars that are used to maintain the system of foster care and redirecting those billions of dollars to families and communities so they have it when they need it. What I often say is, think about, for everybody listening, think about your family, the extended network of people you love, and imagine that a child in that family is harmed by someone within that network. what would you want to happen? Would you want to sit down as a family and a community and figure out what you're going to do to prevent that harm from happening? Or would you want the government to come in and take that child away from you and for them to figure out? I think that most people would want the first option. They'd want to sit down as a community of people and figure out what they're going to do. And if you want that for your family, then you should want that for every family. And that's what abolition is. That's what we're calling for here. So that's what we talk about at Upend. But I want to quickly make sure that I say Upend is not the only organization or activists doing this work. We're a part of the movement. Like this is a good example. We just put out this blog post about really making investments in families, not in the system. But there's some other, in addition to Upend, there's some other organizations that people could check out. JMAC for Families. Joyce McMillan out of New York City is probably one of the most important activists to this movement who's doing incredible work. That's jmacforfamilies.org. There's one called, if you show people JMAC for Families, because they're amazing.
jmacforfamilies.org. Here we go.
Yeah, there's Joyce right there doing amazing work in New York City towards abolition and really coming up.
Hey, I think I just watched an interview of her and she was saying how they put a restraining order on her because she kept going down there talking. I mean, maybe that's not her, but it resembles her. But anyway, this is JMAC for Families. And let me just read what it says here. JMAC for Families works to abolish the current punitive child welfare system and to strengthen the system of supports that keep families and communities together. So this is a great resource.
Mm-hmm.
And you said they're out in New York, and there's some great general support from. Oh, these are just some people that support it.
Yeah. Another good agency to take a look at is Movement for Family Power.
Movement for Family Power. Let's check them out. Movement for Family Power. And let's go there. So here's Movement for Family Power.
Mm-hmm.
I'll read their opening statement here. Movement for Family Power works to end the foster system's policing and punishment of families, and to create a world where the dignity and integrity of all families is valued and supported. Yeah. I think to me, if these reforms in particular with I'm not going to say it that way. So no, I'm not going to say it that way. Because I'm trying to keep this positive. I'm trying to keep this positive because when I went through my time and I was going to, I forget the name of the fathers group. That was one thing out of this whole thing. I was like, I'm glad I went there because I could hear some of the stories that was happening that woke me up to the system that I never knew was happening. And these were, 40, 50-year-old men like breaking down, telling the stories because it's terrible taking these kids. This is terrible. You just think a kid is all happy in a foster care. Like this is terrible what's happening. And so that was one good thing. And I do support that fathers group. And it was a group not just for people. It was just people who wanted to vent, people who wanted to. It was like a good fathers group. I do recommend them. Next time I'll make sure I have their name to make sure I bring it up. So this is another good resource. And now the foster system, is that separate from the Child Protective Services?
It's the same. Child Protective Services is the overarching name for agencies across the country that investigate allegations of abuse or neglect. The foster system, and most of us in the movement refer to that as the family policing system, because I think it's important to name what really happens. Child Protective Services is not protecting children. They're taking children away from their parents because they're living in poverty, and then they're blaming parents for their poverty. What we really see the system do is very similar to policing. They're over-surveilling Black communities. They're trying to regulate families' behavior, and then they punish parents when they don't meet this middle-class white parenting standard that the system is built on. So we call it a family policing system. Similarly, many people call the foster care system the foster system because it's not really providing care to children. Many children who are in foster care are abused or neglected in foster care. In fact, rates of abuse in foster care, and particularly in group homes, are higher than rates of abuse in the general population. So the system itself is not protecting children from harm.
That's amazing. What's so, it's like, so they're put into the system because they're poor, and then they're taxed more because they're poor, because you know what you have to do? You got to pay for classes. You got to pay for a psychology. You got to pay for this. You got to, you know, show up to parenting classes, and all while you're working 60 hours a week. This could break anyone. And they have these things, you have it going on for long periods of time. Is it also, is part of the system meant to break the will of parents? Like it's like it's meant to stop those that want to fight back, because I felt that, because I was a parent that was like, oh, this is not happening here like this, and it felt like when I pushed back, they wanted to push harder, as if to put me in my place. But that didn't work for them. So do you think is the design or on purpose this sort of way that they do it that way?
It's absolutely the design. You know, like I said before, the purpose of this system is the same as the purpose of the police and prisons. It's to maintain the conditions of oppression that keep Black Americans subjugated and keep white people in power by inflicting an intervention on families, family separation, foster care, that we know results in things like homelessness, poverty, not graduating from high school, substance use, mental health problems, all of those things. And, you know, when you think about what you just said, people come into the system because of poverty. Then they're made to go to parenting classes, anger management classes, psychological evaluations. Those things have nothing to do with poverty. That's not what parents need. That's not where they need help. So the system makes these people makes parents go through all of these hoops and never get to addressing the actual reason that brought the attention to the system. The system doesn't give people money, when in the most cases, that's what they need. They need money. They need help with their rent. You know, think of the case, which a lot of people know, with Ma'Khia Bryant. You know, a lot of people are familiar with that case. Ma'Khia Bryant came into foster care because her mom was having some mental health difficulties, and she was having a challenge with what were becoming a 16-year-old and 14-year-old daughters who she thought she wasn't able to control. She started to look for help to help her take care of her two teenage daughters. She eventually got to the attention of Child Protective Services. Child Protective Services took the children away from her and placed them with their grandmother. Their grandmother eventually got kicked out of her apartment because she wasn't allowed to have that many people per her lease in that apartment. The grandmother calls her Child Protective Services caseworker and says, "Can you help me find another apartment? Or can you help me with a little bit of money so that I can afford an apartment where I could have my granddaughters with me?" They said, "No, bring the kids here," and they put the kids in foster care. And then we know what ultimately happened to Ma'Khia Bryant. It was all because of money. Imagine what would happen if you're a white middle-class family, upper-class, middle-class family, and you have two teenage daughters and you're having problems controlling them, or you're worried that they're getting out of control. What would you do? You'd go to therapy. You'd get someone to come to the house to help you deal with whatever's going on. That's like an example of how the system targets poor Black families to get them into this system. And even when we know that we could help this family, we could avoid them coming into foster care by just helping this grandmother pay for rent for a few months, they refuse to do it. And they take the kids and they put them in foster care.
It illustrates how this is really not about helping people.
No,
it's really not. If you choose to pay somebody else foster care money instead of giving that money, that literally is saying this is not about the well-being and about the family. That's not what this is about. But it is curious. It's curious for me to find another outlet where they're grooming workers, because this could be tied back to them grooming workers, the overturning of Roe, with the life expectancy going down. Say, oh no, you're not aborting any babies. Those are future workers. Like, exactly. So there's this is just another thing where it seems like almost everything is about funneling people. Poverty is about funneling people either to jail for work or to the army for work. And if you refuse both, then you can die. That's literally the options you have. So I feel like we're gonna have you on again, only because I don't feel like this is all of what's we should be. It feels like there's more and a lot more that we could be talking about a lot of topics involving this. But what is some of the top line things, key points for you that you think, in closing, like our audience should take away, or somebody who's going through this, or somebody who wants to be involved? Like, what are some key takeaways for you and for our audience?
Yeah, thanks. I'd say the key takeaways are, if you didn't previously know, understand, tell the network of people around you, this system is not helping children who are being harmed. That's not what the system is doing. This is a system designed to take children away from their parents because they're living in poverty. And they're doing that disproportionately to Black children and families. Understand that separating children from their parents and putting them in foster care results in enormous harm to both the children and the parents. And that's on purpose. The same way that it is with policing, the results of foster care, homelessness, poverty, incarceration, are the intended outcomes of the system. It's a feature, not a bug. That's what the system is intended to do. And then, understand that, as you were just talking about, this is for the purpose of maintaining an exploitable labor class that will keep the system of white supremacy, capitalist accumulation going. But there is a movement now, a larger movement that's working to end this system. And similar to the defund the police movement, this really is about redirecting resources away from the systems that are causing harm to investing in families and communities, so we don't need a child welfare system.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so many questions. I'm reading these comments, and a lot more questions are coming out. We have to save it here, everybody in the comments. But there is a couple of super chats we'll go over before we leave. I think I missed these, so let's go to this one here. How are your ideas about CPS received by your peers in academia?
Yeah, there's a lot of resistance there. There's a lot of resistance in academia towards this because a lot of people, particularly white researchers, have dedicated their whole careers to doing research about how to make the Child Protective Services system better. So there's resistance, but there's also hope in the sense that, I'm invited often, other people who are involved in this work are invited often to talk to social work classes, people who were once considering going into Child Protective Services to do this kind of work, and they're changing their minds. So there's resistance, but there's some hope there too, because there is a lot of interest in learning more about the abolitionist movement.
I mean, is a lot of this just is a lot of what's hard about tearing these institutions down is just that money's involved?
Yeah, I mean,
people are going to stop making money off of this. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, because it's not just foster care. There's an entire industry similar to the prison industrial complex. There's all of the people, all of the group homes, that are connected to this, all of the psychologists that are providing services, all of the people who are providing parenting classes. If Child Protective Services goes away, billions and billions and billions of dollars that are made connected to taking children away from their families goes away. That's part of the resistance. The other part of the resistance that you and people listening probably understand is people, I think, intentionally misunderstand abolition and think it's only about the tearing down part. You know, Ruth Wilson Gilmore always says abolition is as much about presence as it is about absence. This is about building resources, building new ways of caring for children and families in their communities, so they don't have, so there's not a need for a foster care system. And ultimately, that's what abolition has always been about since the early days of slavery. Abolition was never about just ending slavery. It was always about changing society to fully achieve Black liberation, which never happened. The positive part, you know, was ended during the Reconstruction era. So all of that is left unfinished. But abolition has always been more about building a new society that cares for people, children, families, communities in different ways.
Absolutely. Another questions. I think, did you send 2 of these? Wow, thank you, Andrew. Sent 2 of these. I did double take. So this is a second one. So thoughts on a low like, I don't know if it's likelihood, but a low like ACWA, but universal, so that their family members first, then neighborhood could have the say over adoption. Also, how common is abuse among foster children by moved by CPS?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in the first case, that's essentially what abolitionist ideas are kind of build around. And I don't know if that it would just be a law, but the idea is that power is shifted from the state to families and communities to have decision-making responsibility over how the children in those families and communities are cared for. That's, you know, ultimately what an abolitionist vision is looking towards.
I mean, just imagine, this is just me living in utopia world. Just imagine we live in a world where I'm in a community, you know, in my community, I'm having issues with, you know, my daughter, my teen daughter or whatever. And there's somebody in my community that says, hey, let me go ahead and step in and assist where, you know, I can assist in this way and I can do this. I can help this way. This is the way we work to build better communities, better just lifestyles.
Yeah.
And the second part, is there a statistic on this figure? I would assume that the agency would not want to keep track of the statistic of those children put in foster care and their propensity or the likelihood or how common it is that they're abused by those foster parents.
Yeah, like you said, it can be hard to get some of those numbers, but from the few studies that have been done on that, it shows that rates of abuse in foster care are 2 to 3 times higher than abuse that happens in the general public.
Absolutely. And I don't know if I know this. Amber Alert, Laura Sicilably, connection real danger. I'm not sure. Andrew, I'm not sure, Andrew, what you mean on that one. Thanks you both for y'all's bravery. I like that word, y'all's bravery, for speaking out about this and all the work y'all do. Do you get a lot of angry pushback about what the work that you're trying to do, and the do you get any angry pushback, or is it just more academics, more of a thought pushback?
There's angry pushback. I mean, and again, it's people that mostly misunderstand. In this work, it's people who think that if we abolish Child Protective Services, then children will just be rampantly harmed by their parents, and you know, nothing. There will be nothing there to save them. And it's just a fundamental misunderstanding.
What happened in the 1920s then? Like, what happened? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what happened before all these institutions? But continue. Like, sorry to interrupt.
It's actually, like you said, families and communities got together, right, and they helped each other. So sometimes we talk about this as just remembering how we used to do it. You know, families and community, particularly Black families and communities.
Yeah.
after abolition got together and they helped each other.
We had to survive. We had to survive. Like, so this is I'm just happy to be here to be showing our audience this, and whoever we can, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that's like, I didn't know this was going on. And so I was one of them. So I hope that we're reaching some people that may not have known any of this. I think I have one more question here. Did it disappear? It may have disappeared. So if I missed one of your super chats, is not intentional. I thought okay, so maybe this is one. Yeah, this is one. Oh, I want to talk about, no, I read that one, so my bad. All right, so I did get all of them. So if I missed one of yours, it was not intentional, and my apologies for that. So Alan, I do want to thank you for joining me. I know it's a Friday, and a lot of times people don't like to do interviews on Fridays, but you were more than willing to come on this Friday. This is an important topic, abolition. I'm an abolitionist, and it's important work. And you know, it might be a lifetime. I just may be the person. We may just be the people handing the baton to the people that's going to finish the job, but that doesn't mean we don't push. So thank you again for coming on. Any final words you want to give, or any last sort of shout outs or pep talks for us?
Yeah. No, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate all of the work that you're doing. And again, if you want to learn more about the work, go to upandmovement.org. There's you can sign up for a newsletter we have. You can get in touch with us through a contact page, and we'll follow up.
Absolutely. All right, Alan. So thank you so much for joining. I'm going to put you in the back, and you can, check out whenever you like. And that's going. I don't have another. This is a special episode, so there's not any other like topics or anything. Oops, put that in before I change it. But there's no other topics. But this is important work. And I hope that a lot of people who didn't know this information about Child Protective Services now know this information, and just spread the word. Tell a friend, hey, Child Protective Services is not what you think. So tell a friend. That's really how we're going to sort of combat the ongoing propaganda about the police state, and also about Child Protective Services, because anytime they get these egregious cases, that's the one they want to make movies about. That's the one they want to, name Amber Alerts, or it is Amber, but alerts after. But they don't talk about the families or the kids that have been separated and traumatized by the same system. And just happy to do this segment. Now, for those that miss, earlier today, I was at a fundraiser, not a fundraiser, but we had a fundraiser yesterday for the Watts Community Corps had their turkey giveaway today. So I went down there, check out that stream, and I want to thank all of those people that donated. So the idea was to give out $25 gift cards, right? But we raised so much money, we were able to change that to $50 gift cards. So we actually gave out $50 gift cards instead of $25 gift cards this morning. I'm looking for my closing video, everybody, so just bear with me. So yeah, the event went well. They gave out over 400 turkeys by the time I got there. I'm sure they gave more after I left, but the line was long. It was no questions asked. You needed a turkey, you got one. And it was good to see all of the people in the community sort of come out and support this. There was a lot of people there to help. Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers was there. I actually interviewed him. If you go watch the stream. Now, the camera work is not great. It's on my phone, so I don't want you to think it's great camera work. But if you go watch the stream, you can see me interview Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He's part of the organization, the Watts Community Corps. So But that is going to do it for us today. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like the stream. We didn't do a check earlier because I felt like this topic was so important. Didn't really do comments because I was just so focused on the conversation. But please like the stream on your way out. If we can get to 300 likes, that would be great. That's only 60 more. And there's about 100 and some odd people who watched that has not liked the video. So let's see if we can get to 300 likes on this Friday. Don't forget, Sabby is coming up next. Let's see what Sabby's topic is today. I know Elon Musk is one of the topics, but let me see what our other topic is. So the other topic is Elon Musk Twitter fail. And what is this going on with Joe Manchin here? Joe Manchin recruitment begins. So Sabby comes up in about 45 minutes. So we'll take a short, or you'll take a short break, and make sure you come back to watch the Sabby Sab show on RBN. Also, you're liking the stream. You're getting us to 300. Join our Substack. If you're just getting here or you're watching this on replay, join our Substack and you'll get notifications when we go live in clips. Tomorrow we have Margaret Kimberly. I hope it's okay that I announced that, Nick. Tomorrow we have Margaret Kimberly on RBN. So look for that. Look for when we're going to be starting or doing that. And I think that's it. That's all the announcements. We're going to end with MLK. Actually, no. I brought up the other one. So hang on a second. Because I think this more fits with the topic here. This one fits with the topic.
22. Norwood Hasty was asked if he thinks slavery was immoral.
No, I don't. Because when a slave came from Africa, he couldn't speak the language. He was totally untrained to do any job at all that would fit in with the civilization. Someone had to take care of him. Someone had to take care of him 24 hours a day. And it's pretty hard to do that unless you owned a person. So I think slavery just had to be in those early days.
Mr. Hasty, what was life like in those early days?
As far as the colored people were concerned, I feel that they were a good bit happier than they are now. They had less in the way of material things. But I can remember back in the 20s, when I was a small boy, they were always singing at their work. They had a great sense of humor. Now today, they just don't seem to care much about that as they used to. And I think they've lost their sense of humor somewhat, which I deplore.
What do you think are the differences between the races?
I think there's a refusal to accept responsibility. I think there's a lack of motivation. I've tried here to promote people to foremen, superintendents, but they just refuse to do it. They just don't want the responsibility. They don't worry like the white man. If they have troubles, they go to sleep and wake up the next morning, and that trouble is over.
Is it possible that white people have something to do with the lack of ability for blacks to assimilate into this culture?
Absolutely. The white man has certainly been prejudiced and to quite an extent unfair. But customs die awful hard. It takes a long time. And everyone knew years ago that the Negro would have to be given equality. But in the South, knowing Negroes as we
But in recent years, I've come to see that these are often the people who stand in the way of progress because they are committed only in a lukewarm manner. And every time you move to try to solve the problem, they will respond by saying, you're moving too fast, you ought to cool off, you should put on brakes. And they end up more devoted to order than to justice, and are more devoted to maintaining a sort of negative peace, which is merely the absence of tension, than gaining a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. And they can always say to you that you should wait for a more convenient season. And I've come to see that these are the people that often stand in the way because they get close enough to you to at least discuss your plans, and they become friendly enough to talk with you. You at least have dialogue with them, but they want to stand in the way of every move forward. And this has been my disappointment. I think at times it is better to have outright rejection and misunderstanding from people of ill will than to have lukewarm acceptance from people of goodwill. It is better to have absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will than to have partial understanding from people of goodwill. And this is what we're seeing every day in our struggle in the South, that many of the moderates of the white South and many of them mean well, and I shouldn't only say the South, but the moderates all over, stand in the way of progress because they refuse to understand the problem, and they live by the myth of time, failing to realize that time will not solve the problem. And there's a danger that the moderate will live by this myth, believing that if you just leave things alone and not push too much, time will solve the problem. And it has always been my contention that this is an invalid view because it goes out with the idea that that is something in the very nature and structure of time that will miraculously solve all problems. And time really is neutral. It can be used either constructively or destructively.